My name is Margaret Ann Caldwell. I'm 68 years old, and for nearly 50 years I was a wife, a mother, and the quiet soul behind Cedar Grove Orchards, a small organic apple farm nestled in the rolling hills of Vermont. My hands, now stiff from arthritis, still remember every step of kneading dough into sourdough loaves and pruning trees at dawn alongside my husband Thomas. 3 weeks ago, I buried him. Thomas and I had been married since 1981. We built everything together, this orchard, this home, this family. Yet the morning after his funeral, I realized that maybe what I thought I'd built wasn't enough to hold on to our children. Thomas died of pancreatic cancer after 14 months of watching a man so connected to the earth slowly lose his strength, stolen bit by bit. He didn't want the kids to know. Let them live their lives a little longer without this shadow, he whispered one night, his voice thick with morphine. And because I loved him, I agreed. But truthfully, I already knew our children, Michael and Julia, had grown distant long before the diagnosis. Michael, the eldest, had carved out a fast-paced career in New York's finance sector and hadn't been home more than a handful of weekends in over 10 years. Julia, meanwhile, drifted from one failed wellness startup to another, always funded by Thomas's savings and perpetually needing one more loan. I had hoped grief would bring them back to the core of who we were, that they'd remember the orchard, the family dinners, the love that built this house. But when they came for the funeral, I didn't see children mourning their father. I saw professionals calculating an estate. The night after the funeral, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the worn wood of our dining table. I told them we could sort through Thomas's things together the next day. It was a small gesture, a mother's way of making space for memory, but they had other plans. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the lace curtains Thomas and I had chosen together 30 years ago. I brewed coffee the simple way Thomas liked, not the fancy imported blend Michael had brought from New York, and waited at the kitchen table. They came downstairs dressed sharply. Michael in a blazer he didn't bother to remove, Julia in a silk blouse with perfectly curled hair. They looked like they were headed to a business meeting, not sitting down to remember their father. "Mum," Michael began, placing his coffee mug down with the same precise care I'd seen in Thomas. "We've been talking." Julia glanced at him, then at me. "We think it's time to start settling things, the estate, the business, the house." I blinked, uncertain. I'd heard right. Settling. "It's practical," Michael said. "You can't run the orchard alone and the house. It's big, Mum. Too much for someone your age. My age." The word weighed heavily in the room. I had pruned those trees beside Thomas through blizzards and heat waves. I had handled payroll when we couldn't afford an assistant, baked pies for fundraisers, driven tractors, delivered crates to food banks. "We want you to be comfortable," Julia added smoothly, her voice like a sales pitch. "There's a wonderful retirement community 2 hours south, Sunnyvale Estates. Activities, friends, people your age." I stood to clear the breakfast plates, needing motion to hide my shaking hands. Then Michael pulled out a folder. "Dad spoke to me about this last year," he said, sliding a set of documents toward me. "He wanted Julia and me to take over." I looked at the papers. They were printed on Michael's corporate letterhead. Thomas's signature was steady, almost too perfect, looked off. He hadn't written that clearly in months, not since the morphine. "This isn't from our family lawyer," I said. "He was lucid when he signed it." Michael insisted he wanted this. Julia said quickly, "A fresh start. There's a developer interested. $7 million for the land. We'd be set. You'd be cared for." A developer. They wanted to sell the orchard, replace a lifetime of harvests, sustainability, and giving back with concrete and cul-de-sacs. "You're talking about selling your father's life's work," I said quietly. "Mum, be reasonable," Michael said. "The orchard can't last forever." I felt something rise inside me, a slow-burning fury I hadn't touched since I once chased off a fox trying to get into the chicken coop. I looked at them, my children, and said with calm steadiness, "Show me the will." Michael hesitated, then pushed it forward again. I didn't touch it. "I'm going to bed," I said. "We'll talk tomorrow." But deep down, I already knew there would be no tomorrow conversation. They weren't grieving. They were executing a plan. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in the bed Thomas and I had shared for decades, listening to the creaks in the farmhouse walls and the wind brushing against the apple trees outside. Every sound was familiar. It was the silence in my children's hearts that had become foreign. By morning, the smell of coffee wafted through the house, not warm or nostalgic, but sharp, bitter, imported Michael's kind of coffee. I moved slowly, my joints aching more from betrayal than age. When I came downstairs, they were already waiting, coats on, suitcase packed, not mine. "We packed some essentials for you," Julia said brightly. "We thought we could drive you to Sunnyvale today, just to look. You don't have to decide yet." "I'm not going to a retirement community," I said, pouring myself a cup. Michael checked his watch. "Mum, be reasonable. The paperwork is done. We close with the developers next week. You can't stay here." "I've lived here my entire adult life," I replied calmly. "This is my home. It's all of ours." Michael said flatly, "Dad left the business to us. It's time you let go." I looked at him, and for the first time, I truly saw him. Not as the boy who used to trail behind Thomas through the orchards, curious about bees and frost, but as a stranger, a man who viewed me as an obstacle to be managed. "I need my medication," I said, stepping back, "and I'd like to grab some family photos." Julia nodded, relief evident on her face. "Take whatever personal items you want. We'll send the rest upstairs." I didn't shed a tear. I gathered my pills, but also something they didn't know about, a hidden panel in the medicine cabinet installed back in the 80s when Thomas worried about burglars. I retrieved my passport and birth certificate from the closet, then reached behind his old flannel shirts and pulled out a small fireproof box. It was heavy. Inside was something far more valuable than memories, the original deed to 20 acres of land, purchased in my maiden name before marriage, land with water rights, land essential to any future development. When I returned downstairs, my purse was heavier, but my heart felt lighter. "Ready?" Michael asked. "Sure," I said, letting Julia take my arm. I let them believe I was beaten. We drove past the fields just beginning to bloom, past the elementary school where I volunteered, past the library where I read to children. But instead of heading towards Sunnyvale on the highway, Michael turned onto a quiet county road. 20 minutes later, he pulled over onto a gravel shoulder beside an empty field. "This is where you get off, Mom," he said as casually as if announcing a stoplight. "The house and business are ours now." Julia's smile faltered. "Michael, she'll contest the will, make scenes. This is cleaner. She has clothes, meds, there's a gas station 5 miles up." He opened my door, and just like that, they left me standing on the side of the road with nothing, or so they thought. The car disappeared, leaving a cloud of dust and the bitter scent of betrayal. I stood still, the wind tugging at my coat, clutching the small suitcase they packed for me. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't broken. I was free. I started walking, not toward the gas station Michael had kindly mentioned, but toward town, toward my next move. My flats weren't made for gravel roads, and the early spring sun warmed the back of my neck, but with every step, my purpose strengthened. In my purse was everything I needed: my ID, passport, medication, and most importantly, the original deed to 20 acres of prime orchard land. Land Michael and Julia didn't know existed, land I had purchased in my own name before Thomas and I married. It was a precaution then, just in case the business failed. Thomas had called it our just-in-case safety net. Now it was my lifeline. Those 20 acres weren't just any land. They contained the only natural water source on the entire property. Without it, no irrigation. Without irrigation, no orchard and no development. My children thought they had me cornered, but they didn't understand the soil beneath their feet. They didn't understand the weight of legacy. I did. After nearly 2 hours of walking, my feet blistered and aching, I reached the edge of Cedar Grove and the familiar sight of Miller's Gas and Grocery. It was small, old-fashioned and unchanged, a place where people still called each other by name and paid in cash. I sat on the bench outside and watched cars come and go. I didn't look like much, just a tired old woman with a suitcase, but I had something far more powerful than they ever would, the truth. Ray Miller stepped out from behind the counter, wiping his hands on his apron. He'd known me for over 30 years. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, brow furrowed. "You all right? You look a little pale, just resting." "Ray, it's been a long day," I said. He looked at the suitcase beside me, then back at me with concern. "I'm sorry about Thomas. Heard he was a good man." "Yes," I nodded. "He was." He hesitated, then gently asked, "You need to use the phone, if it's not too much trouble." He led me inside, past shelves of canned peaches and discount cereal, to a small office in the back. I dialed the number from memory, our family lawyer, Harold Jennings. "No, me," he answered on the first ring, surprised. "I've been trying to reach you. I expected you at the will reading." My grip tightened on the receiver. "What reading?" I asked. There was a pause. "Michael presented a will. I have concerns. It doesn't match the file your husband and I updated last year. I need your help." "I'll be there in 1 hour," I said, voice clear, "and your discretion." I hung up and turned to Ray. "Do you sell prepaid phones?" He nodded toward a few. "Want one?" "Yes, and a bottle of water." He refused my money. "On the house, Mrs. Caldwell. You need anything else, just say the word." His kindness nearly undid me, but I didn't cry. I hadn't cried burying Thomas, and I wouldn't cry now. I had work to do, and I wasn't finished yet. Harold Jennings's office was on the second floor of an old Victorian house on Main Street, just across from the town library. He'd been our lawyer for over 30 years. Harold was the kind of man who wore sweater vests without irony and still believed in handshakes. His secretary, Helen, gasped softly when she saw me. "Mrs. Caldwell, Mr. Jennings is expecting you. Would you like some water, coffee?" "I'm fine, thank you," I said. Harold met me at the door to his office. He hadn't aged much since Thomas's last visit, just a bit more stooped, perhaps, but his eyes were sharp and alert. "Margaret," he said, leading me not to the desk but to a pair of leather chairs by the window. He sat across from me, expression serious. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about the funeral, the fake will, the boardroom-like discussion in our kitchen, the drive, the roadside abandonment, every detail. He didn't interrupt, he just listened, nodding occasionally, his face growing darker by the minute. When I finished, I reached into my purse and pulled out the fireproof box, the original deed to the 20 acres Thomas and I had quietly set aside decades ago in my name. Harold examined the document in reverent silence. "This," he said, "this is gold, Margaret. This isn't just land. This is leverage. With the water rights and zoning, the developer can't touch a thing without this." "I know." He leaned back, tapping the edge of the deed thoughtfully. "The will Darren submitted. It's a forgery. I suspected it the moment I saw the signature. It's too clean, too smooth for a man under hospice squire. It's not Richard's." "We'll challenge it," Harold said firmly. "But that takes time. Meanwhile, we use this." He held up the deed. "You still have legal ownership of the most critical piece of land. They can't move forward with the sale without your consent." "I want my home back," I said quietly, "and I want them to understand what they've done." Harold nodded. "Then we'll make them understand. First, I'll draft a letter to the developer. They need to know the property isn't what they were promised. Will they back out? If they're smart, they will. Developers hate lawsuits and incomplete land rights." He stood suddenly, purposeful. "I also know a judge in district court. We can file a motion to freeze the sale until this is resolved." I looked out the window across the street, where a young couple walked hand in hand, unaware of the quiet storm beginning here in this small office. "I don't want revenge, Harold," I said, more to myself than to him. I want truth and peace. You'll have both, he promised. By noon the next day, Harold had filed an emergency injunction freezing any transfer of ownership related to Hazelbrook Orchards. A courier delivered the legal notice to the development firm Darren and Samantha had been working with. Within hours, the deal was suspended. Faced with unexpected legal complications and the revelation that a key portion of the land containing the only natural water source was owned separately and undisclosed, the developer began to backpedal. Their lawyers urgently reached out to Harold for clarification. They don't have the full property and the water rights aren't transferable, Harold said as we sat reviewing documents. More importantly, your children do not have the authority they claim. That evening, I received a text from Samantha. It was the first time she'd reached out since they left me on the roadside. Mom, please call me. We need to talk. Darren's freaking out. We didn't know about that other land. Can we just fix this? I stared at the words on my prepaid phone. No apology, no recognition, just panic now that the money was slipping away. I didn't reply. Later that night, Darren called Harold directly, demanding explanations, trying to reassert control. Harold calmly informed him all future matters would go through legal channels. They're realising, Harold said. They miscalculated badly. They thought I had nothing left, I said, but I had everything. They forgot to value that. Harold looked at me with quiet pride. You're handling this with grace, Eleanor. A lot of people would have gone scorched earth. I lived too long with kindness in my bones to become bitter, I said, but I won't be silent either. Outside the town of Hazelbrook moved on, kids riding bikes, a dog barking in the distance, someone mowing their lawn. Life here was still simple, still honest. I intended to keep it that way. The land would not be sold, not now, not like this. The orchard Richard built, the legacy he left, was not a commodity, it was home, and I wasn't done protecting it. In the weeks that followed, I didn't return to the old farmhouse. I rented a modest apartment above the bakery on Main Street. It had a small balcony just big enough for a rocking chair and some potted herbs. The place smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread in the mornings. It wasn't the home Richard and I built, but it was mine. That mattered. I started teaching quilting on Wednesday nights at the community centre, just like before. I began holding weekend workshops at the library, sharing what I knew about organic gardening and sustainable fruit farming. Teenagers came. Retirees came. Even young couples hoping to start their own farms. People listened. Not because I raised my voice, but because I spoke with history in my hands, the story of land we protected for decades. I donated the water rights to a trust managed by the Hazelbrook Agricultural Cooperative, a local initiative supporting young farmers. They would use it, not sell it. They would care for the trees like Richard had. That was the future I wanted. Darren and Samantha kept their distance. I heard whispers. The developer pulled out. The fake will was formally challenged and frozen, and their reputations took a hit in their cities. But I didn't gloat. I didn't need revenge to be loud, to be real. I chose peace, but not at the cost of truth. The orchard remained untouched, blooming as always in spring. Every time I passed it on my walks, I smiled, not with bitterness, but with the quiet strength of a woman who had reclaimed not just her land, but her voice. They underestimated me, but I had finally remembered who I was. I often think back to that moment on the gravel road, standing alone, a suitcase I didn't pack in hand, watching my own children drive away without a second glance. It should have broken me, but it didn't. Because in that silence, I finally heard the truth I'd ignored for years. Love is not loyalty without question. Being a mother does not mean tolerating betrayal just because you raised the ones who betrayed you. Darren and Samantha believed they could erase me, that because I was older, grieving alone, I wouldn't fight back, that I had no choice but to hand over everything. But they forgot something. Before I was a wife, a mother, a widow, I was Eleanor Grace, a woman who built something with her hands, her heart and her mind, and I never needed to scream to be strong. What they saw as weakness, my silence, my trust, my love, was actually the very power that protected me. If you're listening and you've ever been cast aside, underestimated, or treated like a footnote in your own life, hear this. Your strength isn't in how loud you fight. It's in how well you know what you stand for. And when you stand your ground, even quietly, it echoes louder than any betrayal. My orchard still stands. My name is still on the deed. And my life, it's mine again. So to anyone ever told, this is where you get off, I say, walk if you must, but don't leave your worth behind. Walk with purpose. Walk with quiet power. And when you're ready, tell your story. It might just save someone else. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below. And if you've ever been underestimated and found your strength, tell us your story. It matters.